When I'm 80 years old and sitting in my rocking chair, I'll be reading Harry Potter. My family will say, after all this time, and I will say, always. Alan Rickman never made it to 80, but what he left behind still echoes. Most people knew him as Severus Snape, cold, cruel, unforgettable. But behind the sneer and the black robes was a man few truly knew. Gentle, brilliant, private, and guarding a secret he took to the grave. What if the role that defined him was one he almost walked away from? What if the voice that became legendary was once seen as a flaw? And what if one quiet conversation with J.K. Rowling changed everything? This is the story of Alan Rickman, and it begins where most stories end. From the beginning, the world tried to silence him. Alan Rickman was born with a speech condition. Tension in his jaw made his words slow, muffled, and hard to understand. As a child, he needed therapy just to speak clearly. Later, in drama school, things got worse. One teacher told him, "You sound like your voice is coming out the back end of a drain pipe." But Rickman didn't quit. He didn't fix his voice. He mastered it. A slow, commanding tone. Rich. Unmistakable. He trained harder than anyone, refined every word, every breath, every pause. Soon, what once held him back became his greatest weapon. That voice could fill a theater or break a silence with one word. It made people stop and listen, not just to what he said, but how he said it. Most people didn't see the work, but he didn't need their belief. He already believed in himself, and his transformation was just beginning. This is the real story of Alan Rickman, and it begins in the one place most people overlook: his voice. Alan Rickman had one of the most recognizable voices in film. It was slow, precise, and impossibly smooth. The kind of voice that didn't just speak lines, it wrapped around them, gave them weight, and made you stop and listen. But that voice, the one we all remember, was almost the reason he never became an actor at all. He was born in West London in 1946 into a working-class family. His father died of lung cancer when Alan was just 8 years old. After that, life got harder. His mother worked several jobs to keep the family afloat. Despite the hardships, Rickman always remembered his childhood as happy. Not easy, but full of love. As a boy, he was creative and curious. He drew constantly, fell in love with design, and showed early signs of a theatrical spark. But it was his voice that set him apart, and not in a good way. He had a condition that created tension in his jaw, which made it difficult to speak clearly. His words sounded slurred or flat, and it took effort just to pronounce things correctly. In school, it made him self-conscious. Later, when he applied to drama school, it nearly ended his chances. At the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, Rickman was harshly criticized for his speech. One voice coach told him his diction was lazy, his soft palate weak, and his entire voice sounded like it was coming from the wrong end of a pipe. That kind of criticism would have crushed most people. Rickman didn't argue. He simply went to work. He didn't try to change his voice. He tried to understand it. He studied the mechanics of how he spoke, worked on his breathing, on control, on tone. Slowly, his greatest weakness became the thing that made him unforgettable. Over time, he learned to turn every word into a moment. He spoke with purpose, not volume. He didn't just deliver lines, he gave them shape. His pauses were just as powerful as his dialogue. Every sentence felt calculated, like it carried a double meaning. Later in life, when asked about his famous voice, Rickman admitted he didn't hear what others heard. To him, it still sounded ordinary. But to audiences, it was iconic. It wasn't just a voice, it was a presence. And it gave him access to roles no one else could have played quite the same way. From romantic leads to Shakespearean nobles to iconic villains, Rickman's voice did more than perform. It haunted, it seduced, it lingered. But the voice that would one day become his trademark was born out of difficulty, frustration, and endless discipline. He had every reason to give up. He had teachers telling him to quit. He had a speech condition that refused to go away, but he kept going. Because even then, Alan Rickman understood something that would define the rest of his career. He didn't need to sound like everyone else. He just needed to sound like himself, and soon the world would hear it. When Alan Rickman landed in Los Angeles in 1987, he wasn't there to become a Hollywood star. In fact, he didn't even want to be in an action movie. At the time, he was a respected stage actor in his early 40s. He had just finished a successful run on Broadway, playing the seductive and sinister Valmont in Les Liaisons Dangereuses. American critics loved him. Audiences were fascinated by his performance, and soon, a script made its way into his hands, one that would change everything. It was called Die Hard. Rickman flipped through it and was immediately skeptical. Explosions, hostages, one-liners. It wasn't the kind of role he was looking for. He had never done a film before, let alone an action blockbuster, and playing a terrorist in an American shoot-'em-up movie wasn't exactly the dream. "I'm not doing an action movie," he reportedly said. But then he kept reading. What caught his attention wasn't the action, it was the dialogue. The villain, Hans Gruber, wasn't just a generic bad guy. He was smart, witty, calculated. He quoted literature. He wore a suit. There was something theatrical about him, something Rickman recognized. He agreed to take the part. And within 48 hours of arriving in Hollywood, he was on set filming what would become one of the most iconic debuts in film history. But Rickman didn't just play Gruber, he helped shape him. He insisted that Gruber wear an expensive suit, not the stereotypical military gear. He wanted him to look like a man in control, intelligent, charming, dangerous. He even pushed for a scene where Gruber pretends to be a hostage, adding a layer of deception that wasn't in the original script. At first, the producers resisted. Joel Silver reportedly told him, "You'll wear what you're told." But days later, they handed Rickman a revised script. His instincts had been right. There was another moment on set that proved how committed he was, even when it meant genuine fear. The famous scene where Gruber falls from the skyscraper was filmed by dropping Rickman backwards onto a safety mat from over 20 feet in the air. He was told they'd drop him on the count of 3. They let go on 2. The look of panic on his face in that scene isn't acting, it's real. And it became one of the most iconic shots in action movie history. Ironically, Rickman, who disliked guns and flinched every time he had to pull the trigger, became the face of one of the most beloved action villains of all time. Die Hard was a surprise hit. It made Bruce Willis a star, and it made Alan Rickman, in his very first film role, a household name. But fame didn't come without a cost, because from that moment on, Hollywood tried to cast him as the same thing, over and over again. Alan Rickman played villains so well that it nearly became a curse. After Die Hard, the offers poured in, but most of them looked the same: cold-hearted, menacing, calculated. And while Rickman could deliver that with terrifying ease, he didn't want to become a one-note actor. He fought hard to avoid being boxed in. Then came Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. At first, he turned it down, twice. The role of the Sheriff of Nottingham was thin, a cartoonish villain with no real depth. Rickman thought the script was weak, but the producers were desperate. After several rejections from other actors, they came back with an offer he couldn't refuse: complete creative freedom. Rickman agreed, but only on his terms. He rewrote much of his own dialogue with the help of his friends, including playwright Peter Barnes and comedian Ruby Wax. Together, they turned the sheriff into something far more interesting. Unpredictable, absurd, cruel, and darkly funny. The now famous scene where he cancels Christmas and screams orders to his staff? Pure improvisation. So was the infamous line, "You, 10:30, you, 10:45, and bring a friend." It was over the top, and it worked. He stole every scene he was in. In fact, he was so compelling that it reportedly caused tension with the film's lead, Kevin Costner. Some say Costner demanded that Rickman's scenes be cut down because he was drawing too much attention. Whether that's true or not, the final film still showcases Rickman at his most unhinged and unforgettable. Critics gave mixed reviews to the movie overall, but nearly all of them singled out Rickman's performance as the highlight. He won a BAFTA for Best Supporting Actor, and fans loved every second of his twisted theatrical take on the role. But even with awards and acclaim, the shadow of typecasting kept growing. Hollywood loved putting him in the role of the villain, the refined, intellectual, slightly unhinged antagonist. And Rickman kept trying to prove that he could be more. He didn't just want to be the man who scared you. He wanted to be the man who surprised you. And in his next role, he did exactly that. For all the villains he played on screen, Alan Rickman was known by those closest to him as one of the most loyal, kind, and emotionally generous people they had ever met. And at the heart of his real life was a love story, quiet, enduring, and entirely his own. Her name was Rima Horton. They met in 1965. He was 19. She was 18. Both of them were students with an interest in theater. There was no dramatic beginning, no headlines, no public spectacle, just two intelligent, thoughtful people who found something rare in each other, an understanding. They began dating. 12 years later, they moved in together. They would stay partners for over 50 years. They were never the tabloid couple. No red carpet declarations. No interviews about their relationship. Rickman, intensely private, kept his personal life almost completely separate from his public image. In an industry where relationships are often fleeting, theirs was quietly constant. Rima became a respected figure in her own right, a Labor Party counselor and an economics lecturer at Kingston University. While Alan was filming and traveling, she was building a career focused on public service and education. They supported each other's paths completely. Rickman would often say that she was the only woman he ever loved. In 2012, after decades together, they quietly married in a private ceremony in New York. There were no photos, no press coverage. In fact, Rickman didn't even announce it publicly until later, and only mentioned it casually in an interview. He joked that he bought Rima a wedding ring for €190, but added that she never wears it. When asked how they had stayed together so long, Rickman simply said, "We're just as messy and complex as any other couple, but I really respect her." They never had children. It was Rima's decision early on, and Alan supported her completely. He admitted that sometimes he imagined them raising a family, but also believed the absence of children gave them more freedom to pursue their work and passions. Still, he poured love into the lives of his nieces and into the young actors he mentored throughout his career. Their love story wasn't built on grand gestures. It was built on time, on consistency, on decades of knowing someone fully and choosing them every day without fanfare. And when Alan's time began to run short, his thoughts were with her. According to close friends, he spent his final months making sure Rima would be okay. arranging things for after he was gone, quietly, thoughtfully, just as he had lived. While others measured fame in awards or applause, Rickman's real legacy began at home. In 2015, Alan Rickman received a diagnosis that would change everything. He had pancreatic cancer, one of the most aggressive and deadly forms of the disease. The prognosis was grim, and almost no one knew. Rickman chose to keep his illness private. Only a handful of people, his closest family and friends, were aware of what he was facing. To the rest of the world, he was still working, still mentoring young actors, still accepting film roles and showing up for charity work. He didn't want sympathy, he didn't want attention, he just wanted to keep going. And he did. He continued acting, he continued directing, he even recorded a voiceover for a short charity video, raising money for children and refugees through the simple power of his words. You can still hear it. That calm, unmistakable voice, steady as ever, even as his body was failing. During this time, he began organizing his affairs with quiet precision. He updated his will. He set aside a portion of his estate for charitable causes he had supported for years. He chose who would speak at his funeral, who would be spared the pain of doing so. He made sure that Rima would be taken care of, that the people he cared about would have clarity and comfort. Director Ian Rickson, one of his close friends, later described how Rickman even helped furnish Rima's future home, one she would move into after his death. Not because she asked, but because he knew what she would need. That was Alan, thoughtful to the very end. He also kept seeing the people who mattered, quietly, casually, sometimes under the pretense of tea or a chat, but always with purpose. Those moments would later take on a deeper meaning when the news finally broke and people realized that they had seen him for the last time. There are very few public statements from Rickman about death or dying, but in his personal diaries, which were published after his passing, a clearer picture emerges. His words were always controlled, never self-pitying, but the weight of what he carried is there. Between the lines, in the way he wrote about exhaustion, about time, about letting go, he once wrote, "Nothing feels real, the pre-op is like a movie set." And maybe that's how it felt, surreal, distant, almost fictional. But he wasn't acting anymore. He was facing the one thing he couldn't outthink, outperform, or outlast. On January 14th, 2016, Alan Rickman died at the age of 69. When the news broke, the world was stunned. It hadn't been public. There had been no warning. And maybe that's how he wanted it, because Alan Rickman never made a show of his pain. He simply chose to leave quietly, and in doing so, he left everyone else in silence. Alan Rickman wasn't the first choice to play Severus Snape. In the early casting stages of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, the producers were considering several actors. One of them was Tim Roth. He turned the role down in favor of working on Planet of the Apes. That opened the door. When Rickman was approached to play Snape, he didn't give an immediate yes. The truth is, he wasn't sure how to play the character. At the time, only 3 of the 7 books had been published. Fans knew Snape as cruel, cold, and suspicious, a teacher who seemed to hate Harry. But Rickman felt that there had to be more. So, before he accepted the role, he asked for something unusual. He requested a private conversation with J.K. Rowling. She agreed. During that conversation, she told him one thing, a single detail about Snape's future. It was small, but it changed everything. She told Rickman what was coming, who Snape really was, what was behind the bitterness, the secrecy, the pain, that Snape had been in love with Lily Potter, that his hatred for Harry wasn't simple, and that, in the end, he would be the key to it all. Rickman never repeated what she said. Even after the books were published and the final films were out, he refused to reveal exactly what Rowling had told him. It was a small piece of information, he once said, but it let me know there was more to him than met the eye. That knowledge shaped his performance for the next 10 years. While everyone else was guessing at Snape's motives, Rickman already knew. Directors would sometimes ask him to perform scenes a certain way, and he would quietly push back. Not rudely, just with calm certainty. He knew what Snape was protecting. He knew what Snape was hiding. He knew who Snape really was. And he carried that secret through every film, every line, every look. The people around him didn't understand how deeply he was playing the role until it was too late. Only after the final book came out, only after Snape's memories were revealed, did everything he had done suddenly make sense. It wasn't just acting, it was careful, restrained, masterful storytelling. And it was only possible because of that quiet moment early on when J.K. Rowling gave Alan Rickman the truth and trusted him to protect it. He did, until the very end. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Part 2, there's a moment that changed the way millions of people saw Severus Snape and Alan Rickman. It's the scene where Snape dies. After years of cold stares and cutting remarks, Snape finds himself face to face with Voldemort. He's betrayed, attacked, and left to die. But in his final moments, he asks Harry to look at him. Not out of pride, not out of power, but because he wants to see Lily's eyes one last time. That line, "Look at me," is delivered quietly, almost whispering, as blood fills the floor. It's not dramatic. It's intimate, vulnerable, devastating. For years, audiences had debated whether Snape was good or evil. That scene ended the debate. The truth was clear. Snape had sacrificed everything, his reputation, his happiness, his life, to protect the child of the woman he loved, and Rickman delivered it with heartbreaking restraint. But what most people didn't know was that Rickman had serious problems with how that scene was written. In the book, Snape dies in the Shrieking Shack. In the film, they changed the location to a boathouse. Rickman didn't agree with that. He also questioned the mechanics of the scene, particularly how Voldemort kills Snape. In the original script, Voldemort uses a spell. Rickman pushed back. He knew the spell Rowling had written would kill instantly, and that Snape needed time to speak. He wasn't just thinking as an actor, he was thinking as a storyteller. In his personal diary, he wrote about the moment on set. He noted how the director, David Yates, was stubborn as ever about how the scene should be played. Rickman was frustrated, not for his own sake, but because he wanted it to be right. And still, even with the changes he didn't agree with, he gave the performance everything he had. It's one of the quietest death scenes in any major franchise. There's no swelling music, no last-minute heroics, just truth, just regret, just the sound of a man who has spent his life protecting someone else's child, finally being seen for who he really is. After all this time, Harry asks. Always? Snape replies. That one word undid years of assumptions. It reframed everything, and it broke hearts around the world. Rickman didn't just act that scene, he had been building to it, patiently, for a decade. After filming wrapped on the final Harry Potter movie, someone asked Alan Rickman how it felt to say goodbye to Snape. His answer was quiet, as always. He said it was like a punctuation mark in his life, a moment that marked the end of something extraordinary, and the beginning of whatever came next. But there's a difference between finishing a role and finishing a legacy. Well, Rickman's legacy didn't end when the camera stopped rolling. In many ways, it only grew stronger. He was more than just the characters he played. He was a mentor, a director, a deeply committed friend. He supported young actors behind the scenes. He watched their plays, gave them advice, wrote them letters. Daniel Radcliffe once said that Rickman came to see everything he ever did on stage, in both London and New York, even when he didn't announce he was coming. He gave generously to charity, but rarely spoke about it. He supported causes focused on education, facial cancer research, the arts. When he passed, over £100,000 from his estate was donated to organizations he believed in. He also gave generously to his colleagues, not just with money, but with time, with honesty, with presence. One of the last things Rickman did before his death was help his longtime partner, Rima Horton, prepare for her life without him. He made sure she had what she needed. He planned his own funeral in advance to make it easier on those he loved. Even in dying, he thought of others first. He was direct, he was particular, he was intense. But he was also deeply loyal, disarmingly funny, and endlessly curious. Emma Thompson, who worked with him for decades, said that Rickman could tear you apart with a single remark and then rebuild you just as quickly with a look of kindness, that he was always unpredictable. Never in a way that made you nervous, but in a way that made you pay attention. People often described him as intimidating, but the truth was, he was simply thoughtful. He chose his words carefully. He didn't waste time. And when he gave you his attention, he gave all of it. He was, by every account, the kind of person you wanted in your corner. Someone who stood by you, who told you the truth, who saw your potential even when you didn't. The irony of his career is that he was often typecast as villains, as men with cruel intentions, distant hearts, sharp tongues. But the real Alan Rickman was the opposite. He was someone who made the people around him feel seen, not as they were expected to be, but as they really were. Alan Rickman was never interested in being a celebrity. He didn't chase fame. He didn't explain himself. He didn't play by the rules of Hollywood. What he cared about, deeply, was the work, the truth, the craft. He once said, "Talent is an accident of genes and a responsibility." That's how he lived. He didn't waste his talent. He shaped it, honed it, protected it. And when the time came, he passed it on to others. He taught us that a villain can be a hero, that restraint can be more powerful than rage, that stillness, when done right, can break your heart. He gave us roles that will live forever. Hans Gruber, the Sheriff of Nottingham, Colonel Brandon, Metatron, and of course, Severus Snape. But more than that, he gave us permission to look deeper, to understand that the world isn't divided between good and evil, that sometimes the most complex people are the most human. When the final Harry Potter book was released, millions of readers cried over Snape's final moments, but only one man knew how long it had been coming. Only one man carried that truth silently, playing a character everyone thought they understood until they didn't. And that's what made him unforgettable. Not the voice, not the glare, not the roles, but the choice, again and again, to do things his way, to speak only when it mattered, to keep secrets, not for mystery, but for meaning, to love one woman for a lifetime, to leave quietly, but not without a trace. So, when we think of Alan Rickman, we think of more than a performance. We think of presence, we think of depth, we think of someone who didn't just act, but revealed. And in the end, it's simple. He didn't need to say much, he just needed to say it, exactly the way he did, always.